السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وأشرف المرسلين وبعد. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who came out on time to the dinner tonight. I'd like to thank especially the guests who came from California and brought California weather with them, mashallah. I think this is like the first day in like months that I've even considered turning the AC on. Something, Sheikh Rami, Imam Zaid are, mashallah, bring their vibes, the California vibes with them. Jazakumullah khairan. Mashallah, you know, it makes me very, very happy to be here today. Not on stage, I really don't like to be on stage for people who know me. But when I was actually driving here, I was reflecting on, I think it was maybe 2007, the first time I met Human. And that was in Toronto, if I'm pronouncing that properly in the Canadian way. Toronto, right? Toronto. Although Human calls it Toronto, so you know that Chicago was rubbed off on him. When I met him then, and he was thinking about, or he was actually enrolled, or he was still on the way in the process of coming to Chicago to begin his master's in clinical psychology. And then I remember those apartment meetings that we would have in Schaumburg discussing this idea of integrating Islamic behavioral therapy, or tazkiyah and tasawwuf, into modern day psychology. And I had just come back, I think this has been 2 years or a year since I had come from a specialization program in hadith with my dear teacher and Sheikh Hamza's teacher, Dr. Abdul Halim Chishti No'mani. And he'd always taught me the importance of doing a proper literature review before you embark on any project. So, like, you know, there are oftentimes students of postgraduate programs who do some research in the field, and they'll do like 6 months of research and then they'll realize that the work has already been done. And then you start to regret all that time and effort you put into developing a new field. So the first question I posed to Human was like, okay, well, Human, who's to say that this hasn't already been done? This idea of an integrated psycho-spiritual approach, this idea of an Islamic psychology. I'm sure there's somebody that's done something. And you know, we continue to discuss over the years the idea of integrating basic concepts within, like things that we consider to basic 101 type of stuff, that you shouldn't be angry all the time, right? La taghdab. My young daughter, she goes to school, and like the first hadith that they taught her was, La taghdab, la taghdab, la taghdab. I mean, basic ideas, that like narcissism comes from this, the idea that we don't treat that problem of anger when it begins, sometimes when you're like a child. So I said, you know, I'm not sure if we really need to do a lot of work. I mean, is there a lot of need for an integrated Islamic psychology? And I remember just even recently when we were co-authoring a paper on forensic psychiatry and Islamic law. And I asked Human first, before he asked me to come on as a co-author, that has there been any work in this field? I mean, you have all these Muslim countries. You have Iran and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and I'm sure their court system uses forensic psychiatry being like the intersection between mental health and law. But there's got to be something out there, a lot of research that's been done on how like mental health and Islamic law can coexist and how it can be integrated in countries that claim to be, like in Pakistan, that claim to be, you know, based on La ilaha illallah. And for a long time I was like hesitant to embark on a new research on modern Islamic forensic psychiatry without doing that proper literature review. And to my surprise, what I found was that whatever existent literature exists, it's very cursory, very shallow research, it's introductory level work. And the more that I spent time researching for Khalil Center, the more I begin to realize that there's an incredible opportunity here. One of my teachers is Mufti Muhammad Taqi Uthmani, and I attended an Islamic finance seminar, a training with him once. And during that 3-day training, he mentioned something really interesting. He said that Islamic banking or Islamic finance began to develop in the last 2 decades. But in reality, it was initiated, there were 9 products that were developed in Pakistan during the Zia al-Haq era. And for those people who are not interested, I'll try to speed this up, inshallah, not take too much of Dr. Rani's time. But Islamic finance basically was an attempt in Pakistan to develop certain modern, Islamically Sharia compliant financial products and it failed. The products failed, the banks didn't know how to implement it properly, and as a result, that research was somewhat lost locally. But many of the Arab states, and even England and London Bank, started to research these products and further develop them. Then there was like a boom in in Pakistan, and in Pakistan, their banks in Pakistan began to become interested in developing or offering these same products. So my teacher was mentioning how ironic it is that when these products were developed, they were developed based on an assumption that for centuries Muslim communities had an ethic for finance. And the application of that ethics, if it's done using the collaborative work of scholars of Islamic law, ulama, and specialists in the field of finance, then there is an opportunity to revive those old frameworks and apply them in a modern context. But people were very obviously skeptical until finally, as he says, the mentality of especially those brothers and sisters who are from the subcontinent, I think we can kind of sympathize with this mentality that unless something is imported, it's not a good product. Right? So, like, you know, even soap in Pakistan, if it's imported, it's good quality, it's a good brand, but if it's like local product, it's not really considered to be high quality. So the Muslim community, he said that ironically, the ones who developed these products initially were the Pakistanis, and then they didn't accept it until it came back as a foreign product, as an imported product. So I started to think about that. I'm like, that's amazing. This is an Islamic finance field, a field in which everybody has, you know, obviously a lot of concern about. Mental health or psychology, you know, as much as we want to assume the work has been done and the research has been done and there's got to be some sort of integrated Islamic psychology there, the reality is that it doesn't exist. Muslim therapists and Muslim clinicians are not trained how to, you know, get past certain stigmas. And I know a lot of people who are even here can sympathize with this, but it's very hard, it's very challenging to think of a person as yourself, not just anybody else, but yourself as like spiritually or mentally sick. Even though the assumption for the Muslim was always been that spiritually and mentally we're always seeking to be balanced. We're seeking that i'tidal, that psycho-spiritual equilibrium, right? The idea that throughout our lives, if we look at the example of prophets, the prophets were the ones who were afflicted the most. They were the ones, I mean, the prophets ﷺ used to get therapy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Anbiya ﷺ, they were getting counseling from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the fact that they were so stressed and they were so anxious about the affairs of the world didn't mean that they were debilitated, didn't mean that they should have been ashamed of their stress. I mean, look at Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu comes into the masjid once, sees the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in a state distraught. He says, Ya Rasulullah, qad shibta. O Messenger of Allah, you look like you've aged. I mean, how much stress does a person have to go through that they look like they've aged? That means that, you know, stress and anxiety and what we call a disorder is commonplace. Muslims recognize that you don't have to be ashamed of those things. Rather, that's a part of being a believer in this world, that this is the sijnul mu'min. In any case, my point was that for a long time, you know, I think people would think of Khalil Center as simply like a Muslim mental health clinic. But I want to kind of remind ourselves that this is more than just a mental health project, a clinic project. This is about the development of a new field. And it's not a new field. It's a field that's based on the Islamic tradition, that recognizes the ability of Muslims to be able to take from their turath and to apply principles and methodologies that have more or less gone extinct and to revive them. Just like in the field of Islamic finance. Just like in other fields, in the medical ethics, etc. And we have a great opportunity. We can make an impact not just in Chicago, not just in San Francisco, not just in the United States, but all over the world where people are thirsty for the development of new products. You know, there's this idea now in the field of spiritual psychology of mindfulness training, the use of mindfulness techniques for behavioral therapy. Mindfulness training comes from the Buddhist spiritual tradition. And now Muslims are thinking, hey, let's Islamicize mindfulness training. You don't need to, you already had a mindfulness tradition. You had the idea of muraqabat, the Prophet ﷺ, who was contemplative always. We have a rich tradition of behavioral therapy through the Quran and the Sunnah. We need to be able to now to use these products and to contribute to the field of spiritual psychology, and develop textbooks. Like Khalil Center is involved in this work. It's involved in research. It's involved in developing new products for therapists to be able to use in refugee camps, in clinical settings, in the masjids. It's doing imam training. Basically, what I'd like to say is that Khalil Center is more than what any of us are able to perceive. The opportunity that we have as a community here sitting in Chicago to be able to export a product to like Turkey and Pakistan and Syria and any other part of the world where they appreciate the need for this, it's incredible. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to contribute to this project. Don't think that any contribution that you provide today is going to be minor. If you can free up some time for some research, development, therapeutic work, application of some of these experimental products in the clinical setting, and that develops into something that's real and concrete, you have no idea how much impact that can have in the world. Am I done? Okay. So I wanted to talk a little about just the vision of Khalil Center beyond just what we're currently doing. I know we'll have some, inshallah ta'ala, presentations about what Khalil Center is, where we're currently at, where we're heading, what we've been able to accomplish, and all that data. But I want us to be sitting here today with a very open mind, to think about, we are people who inherited the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ of being very ambitious. The Prophet ﷺ taught us not to think about just our small community, not just our nation, but the entire universe, the physical and the metaphysical, jinnat as well. Maybe there'll be some jinn therapy, like we can not treat people because of jinns, but we can treat jinns. This is part of the scope of our work, right? And not just today, but to the end of time. That was the incredible paradigm shift that the Prophet ﷺ introduced to the companions. That don't just think about yourself, don't just think about your own problems or community's problems. We have to think about the entire universe until the end of time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to broaden our perspective, to appreciate the opportunity, and may He make us amongst those people who then give. I wanted to mention one thing, but I'm not sure if I have the time for it. We have a debt to pay. In the pre-colonial times, institutions like Khalil Center didn't need to have banquet fundraising dinners. There was a system of patronage from governments, from the wealthy, that supported these bimaristans, right? These Muslim medieval hospitals, that supported Muslim colleges. You had huge imperial, if you haven't gone to Turkey and see these imperial masjids, these mosques, and you look at the list of the employees, some of these masjids had hundreds of employees. 20 to 30 like mu'adhins and people who did the iqama, backup khatibs, a person who was responsible to be the mujmir of the masjid. His only responsibility, his job was to light the bukhur in the masjid, right? To make sure that people who need the mushaf can get the mushaf. There are people this was the system that was set up because of awqaf. We have a debt to pay to revive those awqaf, so that we're not struggling to support basic needs and basic services to our community. How are we going to do that? That starts from here. If we can be a part of that, the revival of these endowments, then inshallah ta'ala, whatever work, and this will spread inshallah ta'ala, whatever work comes out of this, we will inshallah ta'ala share that reward. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.